Actually, we're going to take a bit of a backwards trip down the supply chain, and first of all start looking at consumer plastics and what's being done to reduce those in the marketplace, and then consider what's being done in the supply chain, using Riverford as an example, and then we'll hand over to Stuart to talk a little about farm plastics.
As well as working for the Sustainable Food Trust, I have by accident become some sort of a plastic activist. This all started a number of years ago when I saw Rebecca Hoskin's documentary, A Message in the Waves. Up until that point, I hadn't actually realised that species such as albatross are becoming extinct because of our inability as humans to deal with our plastic waste properly. I'd already been doing as much litter picking as I could whilst walking on farmland, but every time I was coming back with so much litter I could barely hold the dog lead, and I realised if I wanted to make a really big difference I needed the help of others, which is when I set up Keynsham Wombles. We now have over 200 volunteers, and it's turned into a really successful community project. So I've expanded this project into what I'm now calling No Place for Litter, which aims to support other people who might like to do what I've done, but it also looks at tackling litter across the whole community, so whether that's involving businesses, schools, church groups, because litter is a community-wide problem. So No Place for Litter isn't just about picking up litter, it's about changing behaviour to prevent litter being created in the first place, hence the need to work with producers and retailers. This is an area which we litter pick regularly. It's between a school and farmland, and the plastic that we pick up here, it looks like you can see how much plastic is there, but when you start litter picking it, you realise you're taking off layer upon layer of plastic until you realise that fence is actually, the foundations of that fence go into historic plastic. I believe that plastic is only used in this way because it's been too cheap for far too long, and the costs of its disposal and of dealing with things like this haven't been factored into its initial cost. If they had been, I think we would have found far better solutions to food waste than wrapping cucumbers in plastic. As part of this project, we've had great success working with local retailers, independent retailers, but we just couldn't get the nationals who work in our town, who have stores in our town, to take any notice of us whatsoever. So in frustration, we planned what became known as a plastic attack at our local Tesco's. We were really lucky that our protest coincided with Michael Gove making a statement on plastic waste. The BBC picked up on it and edited this short clip. It went viral with 18.5 million views and has now created a movement of people around the world who are returning their plastic to the supermarkets after they've shopped. And I'm still at a complete loss to understand why it was so popular. And needless to say, when we did our next protest at Waitrose, their head office contacted us ahead of the event. All of this is all very well, but unless things also change at farm and producer level, it won't have nearly as big impact on reducing plastic in the food chain as we as protesters might want it to. This is a statement I read in an article which came out after the Blue Planet 2 programme, and I find it absolutely incredible that that programme had this level of effect, which is basically saying that more consumers consider packaging as their first priority when making purchasing decisions above price. which is a remarkable change around. I also believe there's an increasing number of consumers like myself who are avoiding supermarkets altogether as we're trying to reduce plastic packaging in our shops. Of course, this isn't a complete solution, because if you're going to buy something like meat from a farmer's market, obviously it has to be wrapped in plastic to keep it clean. So how can businesses respond and give us as consumers what we're asking for? Does being independent mean you can react quickly, or are the costs of change prohibitive? Does the packaging required for this even exist? And does regulation need to change in some areas to keep up with new customer expectations? Or will this just simply create a new waste stream which we don't have the facilities at the moment to deal with it? I'm hoping that Robyn and Guy will be able to answer some of these questions. However hard we try as individuals, I know it can be very hard to avoid plastic in our lives, and I would imagine this is a particular problem on farms. There's the obvious examples of silage wrap and feed bags, and there's also a big problem caused by litter from flooding, public roads and footpaths, and the very most recent entry on the list of things to worry about is plastic fibres in sewage sludge contaminating soil, about which there's been very little research done so far. One solution I did have for litter is that if your farm is close to housing, you could think about inviting litter picking groups, of which there are surprising numbers around the country now, to help with litter picking after events such as flooding. I live downstream from Bath, and after there's been a flood event, you just look at the fields and you just cannot imagine how that litter can ever be removed from the fields. So if anybody's interested in that, I'd be very happy to help link farmers up with litter picking groups. I found in the fight against litter that working with others in your community provides benefits which go far beyond the original intention of removing the litter. So finally, my challenge to the other speakers and to you, the audience, is to think about how you might reduce plastic in your lives and on your farms in two ways. Actually, in the day-to-day working of your farm, and in the packaging of products which you're selling on to consumers. Thank you.
Thank you, Erica. I think it's fascinating and actually really heartwarming to see what can happen when communities come together and really make an effort to reduce environmental impacts such as litter. But I think something we should consider throughout the discussion is what mechanisms could government and even the market introduce to help empower more communities to make a similar change. So I'm now going to hand over to Guy Watson and Robyn Copley-Wilkins from Riverford, who are going to jointly tell you a little bit about the journey they've gone on in reducing their plastic packaging.
It's an incredibly complex issue, and it needs to be, all the solutions need to be thought through so carefully, because the first attempt we made to get around the plastic thing was to move to oxidegradable plastics in about 2000, early 2000s, and cost many tens of thousands of pounds, and when the damn thing started breaking down, we couldn't even get rid of them. They couldn't be recycled, they had to go to landfill, believe it or not. So, oxidegradable plastics should be banned. There are almost no reasons where they are better for the environment than conventional plastic, something I'll leave to Robyn to discuss. So the kind of knee-jerk response is seldom the right one, is my argument. We then did a study a little bit later with Exeter University in 2005, looking at the carbon footprint of the business, mainly focusing on climate change as being the key challenge facing our planet, and I would still maintain that that is unchanged and that we should not be deflected from that as being the most important challenge. And one of the results of that survey was that in most instances, looking purely at climate change, plastic was a better packaging material than paper, something which is counterintuitive to most of us, and of course it doesn't address some of the issues which Erica spoke about its threat to wildlife and just its unpleasantness in the environment. When it came around this time with Blue Planet, I was very fortunate that I didn't have to make the decisions myself. I could call on Robyn to do this research, which she has done, so I'm going to sit down and hand it over to her. But some of the sort of frustrations that have come out, we already use about a quarter as much plastic as a supermarket would for the same given. We've had that independently researched and verified, but you know, it's far from perfect. The solutions that we have, I think, are better than most, but they are, again, far from perfect. I mean, we use paper punnets. I hate the bloody things, having spent 2 days stuffing things into them and trying to get the covers on before Christmas, and they're worse for the environment than plastic. I honestly do not have the courage to change the plastic for our customers. So I'm saying the idea that an informed customer is going to drive sensible environmental decisions, I'm afraid I don't believe to be the case. I think the customer is very often wrong, and getting rid of plastic straws is not going to save the planet. My main worry about the whole plastics debate really is that I think it is a distraction from climate change. It could be, if you look at it positively, it could be an entry into the debate that we decide that we can no longer use our planet as a dumping ground for our ill thought out products and waste. But I'm afraid it could also be a distraction that you think, because you got rid of the plastic straws, you can get on a plane and fly to New York and everything's all right. And indeed, I did look at a bit of research sponsored by Good Energy, which listed plastics was almost as high as climate change as a concern. And when it came to a propensity to actually take action, you got down to the 8th reason until you got one that actually addressed climate change. And the first 3 were to do with plastics. I'm sorry, I find that worrying. So I'm just saying it's not as simple as that, and at that point I think it's probably best that I sit down and hand it over to Robyn, who's got all the details, and it is the details that matter. Thanks.
My name's Robyn, and my role is as a packaging technologist, and that means I have a history in packaging, working for multinationals, and a background in sustainability, which allows me to look at packaging development from concept to when we're looking at scaling up products or changing products for seasonality. So I started at Riverford 18 months ago, and I got my laptop and a desk and a letter, and to the top of the letter was stapled a plastic net. And I was getting about 3 letters a week, ones that customer services couldn't deal with because they needed a bit more explanation, and they're quite often addressed to Guy as well. And then Blue Planet happened and it snowballed, and I went from getting 3 letters to about 20 letters. And I got to a point where I was spending so much time answering letters that we had to sort of put the letter writing on hold and get on with dealing with what we were going to do. So we started initially with the plastic net and looked for alternatives. We need the net because we need to get weighed quantities of citrus and alliums to our customers in the appropriate weights that we've sold them to. We have machinery that we use, not very high tech, but we've invested in that, and we needed a product that would allow us to continue with that production process. I found a product that's based from wood thinnings. It's an Austrian product, and it's a beach net. So it's home compostable, and it will break down in normal home composting facilities. I then started looking at our whole product range, and there was a few things that we'd slid. We'd perhaps put in a plastic bag because it was easier for a driver to be able to pick that item, and the item was better protected. If it was dark, they weren't going to grab it, and there was less potential for damage. So what we did is we unpicked those decisions. We went back and we said, okay, if you're going to grab a cauliflower, grab it from the top, don't grab it from the leaf. We eradicate the plastic bag. If you know what type of collie it is, then you don't need a plastic bag or a paper bag with a label stuck onto it telling you the variety. For our squashes, we even went through and took out our paper bags because we could put a sheet together, put all the different varieties of squash on them with images, and our drivers, even if they needed a quick check, they could identify it and get the right squash to the right customer. We then started looking at what we were going to do with the items that needed plastic. So we weren't going to be able to get away from, we sell leafy vegetables, we sell salad crops, and they're really good for our Devon farms. We have a very short supply chain, so we don't need the volume of plastics that some of the supermarkets need, but we still do need protection for those. We've had customers who've requested that the leaves be opened and tipped into the reusable paper cardboard box that we send. But once you actually do that and you put it on somebody's doorstep, they never really want to eat it. And what's the point in giving somebody and farming and putting energy and the carbon that we do into making that product if by the time it gets to somebody's doorstep, they don't really want to eat it? Alongside that, and with all the rest of our packaging, we're also working on getting the correct messaging to customers on their packets. We have previously relied on getting some information on the website and saying, oh, here's a link, follow it through. But who actually follows that link and gets the proper information? What we need to do is, when the customer has the point of packaging in their hand, when they want to throw it away, they need to go, oh yeah, I can recycle this. Or it needs to be recycled with my flexible plastics. Or actually, I can't recycle flexible plastics, so if I leave it in my box, we'll bring it back to the farm and we'll recycle it on farm for you instead. Now with our home compostables, that will be really important, because what we don't want to do is contaminate plastic recycling with our home compostable material that we're sending out as well. So alongside the messaging and taking back flexible plastics, we also will be moving over and taking back home compostable material. I have big worries about the amount of potential for home compostable material to be just ending up in landfill alongside the plastic that's there at the moment. It's a responsibility of the producers to understand what the end-of-life solutions are for the whole of the product that we're sending out. So it's with that that we also have to remember we'll never be able to fully move, well, currently with the materials that are available, we won't be able to move away fully from plastic. We sell meat, we use reusable packaging in our meat, so if you ever get a meat order from us, we send out wool that's wrapped in plastic. If we move that over to a home compostable plastic, you might get one use, you might get two, but you wouldn't get the 10 uses that we get out of that product at the moment. So my job is looking at what we have and pragmatically making the right decision for the right product, so that we can be most sustainable for our products, our customers and the environment.
Thank you both. I'm now going to hand over to Stuart Roberts, who is a Vice President of the NFU, to talk a little about the challenges surrounding the use of plastics on farms and what can be done to try and reduce those.
Thank you very much. I wanted to start with an apology, actually, as I've been coming to Oxford for an agricultural conference for about 15 years, and you all know where I'm heading with this one. It has taken me 10 years to get to the Oxford Real Farming Conference, but I can almost guarantee it will only take me 12 months to come to the next one. It's great to be here. It's lovely not to have to wear my tie, which is somewhere in a dustbin halfway down the high street if anyone wants to go and retrieve it. The only thing I am bitterly disappointed about is I saw on Twitter early this morning these absolutely magnificent wooden name badges. But I was very disappointed when I turned up. They hadn't got me one, so I've got mine on a sticker. So I will, next year I'd like a wooden one if I could. Look, I was asked to come and talk about on-farm plastics, a little bit about what we're doing on our farm, a bit about what the industry's doing, a bit about what I thought the wider industry could do, and pick up some of the points that have been made. I think some of which, particularly the points made by you, Erica, are actually pretty inspirational and have led me to think there's something I'm going to do, and I'll come on to that. And by the way, you've got 7 minutes to say all this in, and it reminded me you've got to get all these points across comprehensively, and you've only got 7 minutes. It reminded me of a time, a story that somebody knew once before. I know there's only 6 and the way to waste time is to tell a joke, but it's a good joke, I promise you. It reminds me of a story a long time ago, a guy called Sid Fennell. Some of you may well remember this guy. I'm sure Patrick remembers him. He was Lord Carnarvon's racehorse trainer. And he always used to be asked to give comprehensive reports, a bit like I've been asked to do here, give a comprehensive summary on waste, but do it, and he used to do it in a very long period of time, very long, lengthy reports. And his lordship phoned him up one day and he said, look Sid, I'm fed up with these long reports, I want it condensed, I want it comprehensive, but please keep it short and sweet. So he says, not a problem. And one Thursday afternoon, the fax machine whirred into action and came through on the fax, SF, 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 SF. So his lordship phoned up and he said, what on earth does this mean? So he says, well, he's told me to keep it concise. So what that means, sir, is started, farted, slipped and fell, see you Friday, Sid Fennell. So I will try and cover the points, and I'm now down to 5 minutes, I know, sir, so before you point that out. Look, for me, I think one of the most important things that's already been said, it was said by Guy, this is bloody complicated. There is no simple solution to this, and I think it is very easy to make big political statements which arguably look to ease people's consciences rather than getting to the root of what the real problem is. And I think you were saying earlier, how long will it be before things really change and Michael Gove makes things really happen? I think the bigger question is, how long will it be before we see a change of Secretary of State? I wonder whether one will happen before the other. But look, for me, I think it's a pretty simple answer. The question that we were set in this session was, how can we wean ourselves off our dependency on plastic? I actually think there's a very simple answer to that. Make it easier. You know, we touched at the very end of what you said about the infrastructure we've got in this country. You go to other parts of the world, they make it much easier to recycle. In my town, over the last 3 years, we've had 4 different systems with 3 different coloured bins. We've switched from the recycling going into the green bin to different recycling going into the brown bin to all of the waste going back into the brown bin now. I have not got a bloody clue what to do with plastic in my hometown, because it is not easy. And on farm, it is made far more complicated. So what have we done? Well, I think there are things we can do. You quite rightly touched on the issue of silage wrap. This is the second bane in the countryside. The first one is actually one you hadn't picked up, Erica, earlier, which is a real frustration. That is the issue of fly tipping, which is a huge waste issue, and I will come back to that shortly. But I think the first thing for me is certainly around silage wrap. There's some really innovative things going on at the moment. So certainly when you look at, there's some work being done by at least one West Country plastic manufacturer at the moment who's looking to use potato starch to create film to go onto silage wrap. And I'll do a quick plug for the NFU, which doesn't happen very often, I suspect, at the Oxford Real Farming Conference. We have actually wrapped our monthly publication now in plastic from potato starch, so it is fully compostable, and we're very pleased with it. It's gone down very well. There's also some other products. There's one I was reading about the other day where we've got some PhD students who've actually created an edible bale wrap. That's a phenomenal product. That really will start to change things. But we can also start to look at doing different things. I actually switched from having my silage in a clamp to baling it. I've actually now reversed that. I've actually gone back, and it looks like Patrick's done exactly the same, so I've just stolen Patrick's thunder, so apologies for that, Patrick. But at this conference I get to speak before you. At the last time we spoke, you spoke before me. So, but no, that's something we've done, and I think as an industry we've got to take responsibility. Now, what does that mean? That means we have to look at how we change our culture. That is how we talk about these things. We've got to use less of it. But we've also got to make it easier. And one of the things for me that I've found, particularly recently, I was being briefed on plastic very shortly before Christmas. I'm being told about how, because agricultural plastic is heavily contaminated, and it is by its very nature, it always will be, then actually it is at the bottom of the pile of things that people wish to recycle. Therefore, when China and other Asian markets switch off they're wanting to import, it's the agricultural plastics that don't go, and therefore they end up being stockpiled in this country because we don't have an outlet for it. I was then reading the newspaper, I think it was yesterday or the day before, that actually these stockpiling and these mountains of plastic that everyone was worried about have not materialised off the back of the Chinese import ban. Well, actually they have, they're just in a different place. Because what's actually happened is the collectors are now taking the pragmatic decision themselves. They don't want to collect it. So actually this stuff is still there, but it's actually on farm. We've got to have the infrastructure here. We should not be relying on sending our plastic somewhere else. We've got to, and one of the things that I think we could very easily do, it would not be difficult, it happens in other parts of the world, is actually we just put the onus on the person who creates the plastic in the first place to ensure the infrastructure is in place to then deal with that plastic at the end of its life. I don't think that's a very difficult thing. It's not a difficult thing to legislate for. Politically, it will be challenging. I think it's very interesting. We talk about, and it was said earlier, I think it was you that had said, Robyn, that home compostable plastics are 3 times as expensive as normal plastics. Was that what you were saying? That's because we don't have the real cost of plastics. We have a very artificial cost. It was very interesting listening to Michael Gove, and I've had the pleasure today of listening to Michael Gove at 2 conferences within an hour and a half of each other. It was a fascinating experience. But one of the things that he touches on is actually we don't have the real cost of food. That's absolutely right. That is absolutely right. And part of the plastics issue is buried in with that. So I think whilst plastic in itself is a complex issue, as Guy said, actually plastic is only one component of a much more complex food system, which actually you have to unpackage all of those bits to really understand it. So look, for me, I think that the end point is, look, it is damn complicated. I think there are things we can do. Something I am going to do, and I've been sat here, I don't know how I'm going to do it yet, Erica, I'm going to take your lead, and I am going to set up a litter picking group like your one in my hometown at home. So I'm actually going to get off my backside. I don't know when I'm going to find time to do it, but I will find time. I will. It's the Michael Gove, exactly. I'll promise it, and at some point I'll be there. No, I genuinely will deliver it. And you asked a question. Why was that video so popular on Twitter? And Twitter's a very, very strange social media. Insofar as I will put something very sensible about the food industry up, and I'll get half a dozen retweets. I'll put a very strange picture of me in a Christmas suit on there, and I got 400 tweets. For those of you who don't follow me on Twitter, don't go and look at the Christmas suit. It is not worth looking at. The reason that was so successful is because it is an inspirational story. It is a real story, and it is something we can all do and we can all replicate. So look, we've all got to get off our arse. I've said what I'm going to do. I'm going to do something. I've already done the thing that Patrick's going to tell you he's done as well. But he would have done lots more things, because he's a genuinely another inspirational guy. But look, we have got to get off our backsides. We've all got to do something, but we've not got to think there is a simple solution to this. It is a much more complex solution, and it will involve changing a culture, taking responsibility, and putting in place far better infrastructure than we've currently got in this country to deal with it. Because genuinely, if you make something easy for people to do, they then run out of excuses for not doing it. If we make it easy for people to do, they will do it. Thank you very much.
But what strikes me, and this is my story to add to this, is that plastic disposal on farms, we're not immune from this. But we've got a company in Lambton called Lambton Agricultural Services, which are really one of the best waste recycling companies in the UK. And I was talking to the guy who founded it, who's a parent at the school where my boys go to. And he said the thing is, the amount of plastic that it gets taken in on tractors and trailers to Lambton Agricultural Services, which we do, we drive a tractor with, you know, half a winter's worth of silage bale wrap into Lambton, and it goes across the Way Bridge, and then we dump it all off, and then we pay 200 quid or whatever it is. He said the amount of plastic which comes back from farms in the area compared to the amount of bale wrap which is bought is just a huge differential. And I know this because I'm not going to, you know, this is just obvious, everyone has this story, but on quiet days when, you know, you can see things around the farm, you see all these fires on the farms all around my farm, and all the farmers are burning plastic. It's what they've always done, and they're still doing it on a big scale. So the difference between the plastic which Mark Williams is getting back into Lambton and what disappears is either buried or burnt, and most of it is burnt, and you can see the evidence from our hill. So one thing that could be done, and this is maybe a question to the NFU, if we could encourage so we buy silage wrap, so it's audited. So if the audited purchase of silage wrap was a requirement to account for the weight of plastic and the plastic chemicals that you purchased to show where they've been recycled, that would change everything. And I know that's not the same as making it easy exactly, but it's like applying the polluter pays principle through a system which we could probably quite easily do because the audit trail's already there. Maybe that's already required on some farms, but it's not required in West Wales. So that's my contribution. But I think it's a huge amount of plastic which is not getting back to be recycled, which is coming off UK farms. And in a way, that's your point about the failure of the polluter pays principle, isn't it? Because if you're not financially accountable for the plastic you buy and its true cost, then you're just carrying on using plastic. And we put in our clamp out of shame, really. It wasn't an economic decision. It cost an absolute fortune. So that's my contribution.
Anyway, as for making them everyone accountable for, I mean, in our case, it's just, I mean, it's impossible. It would actually be illegal. I mean, I would love, we do invite our customers to send the plastic back. I would love to send it all out in biodegradable bags. In fact, probably have a biodegradable line, and they put all their vegetable wasting in and they sent it back to us to recycle it. As it is at the moment, and I know this because I am in a wrangle with our local environment agency, that would be illegal. I mean, or it would cost tens of thousands of pounds to get the licenses that they would enable. So it would be, I think, Stuart, you said it was simple. Like hell it is. I mean, really, it would be anything but simple.
That's not what I said, Guy. What I said was the answer to the question, which is how do we wean ourselves off plastic, is we make it easier. Actually, how you make it easier is bloody complicated, and I think that you're absolutely right.
All right, well, my argument is that the emphasis should not be on the customer. It always comes out, you know, the customer will sort it out. You know, what we need is informed customers, and that'd be the solution for everything. And that's just an excuse to do nothing for another 10 years. What we need the government is to bloody well legislate. You know, firstly on unified curbside collection. Secondly on saying you cannot put a fizzy drink in anything other than a clear plastic bottle if those are the only ones that can be recycled. You know, you just can't leave these things for the market will not find solutions for complex issues, you know, like these, and almost all environmental issues are complex, and the market forces are incapable of finding the solution.
I'd agree entirely with that, and I think you look at how many times do we hear the consumer will provide the solution. Forget plastics for a minute. One of the big debates this morning, and it was over at the other end of the high street as well as at this end of the high street, was around standards and imports of food, and how do we protect our standards against imports produced to a lower standard, right? Food produced to a lower standard. And actually the immediate answer is, well, the consumer won't let it happen. It's absolute rubbish. You've got to grow some political courage in this area, and I think this one is exactly the same as it is with food standards and where we go with trade policy. I think actually they're very different issues, they're very complicated, but actually the solutions may not be that different.
It seems to me that there's some argument in beyond all of this of taking a slightly broader, longer view, in that for the past 50 years or so we've been kind of on a trajectory down a river of change in our relationship with food in general, the sort of the supermarket model, etc., and convenience and overpackaging, which has kind of come about. We've all accepted it to a larger degree, and now we're questioning it with good reason. And it seems to me that we need to look further down that river as to what things are going to be like, with climate change as being the pivotal of things that are important for us over the next 10 years, and what relationship we want to have with food, and how any food store or box scheme or whatever might look like if we imagine it where we have a truly sustainable food production and retailing sort of environment. Because it strikes me that as a retailer I am running an outfit which is wholly unsustainable when I look at what it probably looks like in 20-30 years, and there is very little thought or consideration for how we plan ahead rather than just respond to what David Attenborough had to say.
Now, you've mentioned silage wrapping. But what we haven't talked about is polytunnel covers and horticultural fleece.
Yeah.
Do you see any solutions to those two problems, please?
It basically proves I haven't read my brief properly, so I'm just reading it at the moment. Where actually there's a really interesting piece of work that BASF are doing at the moment, where actually they're using cornstarch to create polytunnels and plastic polytunnels. So actually there's some really interesting work going on there. It isn't the solution yet, but I think certainly there is a fair bit of work going on there, so I think that's one that's quite useful. On the others, I think the point you make, the gentleman on the left here from Bristol, I think actually that gets to the heart of what I was saying, that actually sometimes it's the food system we need to look at rather than the use of plastic on an individual food, because I think sometimes the system is what has led to the need for more plastic. I suspect there's certainly some correlation there. And on the fossil fuels point, I think there is a much wider issue that we look to, and look, I'm at the minute very much trying to inject some balance back into a lot of debates, particularly the one around red meat. That's not for this room here and now. But actually when it comes to fossil fuels, that's exactly the same. We have got to get to a point where we have a much deeper discussion about how we wean ourselves. In fact, we talk about weaning ourselves off plastic, weaning ourselves off fossil fuels. I think there is some big discussions to be had around that going forward, and I think these are the things that society need to address. We think, and Guy, you mentioned it, I think we think that not having a straw will deal with climate change. This eases our conscience in some ways. I'm paraphrasing. Actually, no, we've got to look at much deeper at these issues. Now, I suspect it isn't as simple as if we use less fuel, we therefore end up with less byproducts, which leads to less plastic. Because actually, I suspect the plastic demand will still be there, and there will be a way of filling that. So I think you won't necessarily get one outcome because of the previous action, but actually we do need to address both of those issues at the same time.
Yeah, on the tunnel covers and these tunnel covers, I'm pretty sure are almost all recycled, tend to be fairly clean and clear, and that's relatively easy to recycle. Fleece is much more difficult. We actually do go to extraordinary lengths to clean our fleeces. It takes the field staff half the winter to do it, and they are recycled. They're non-woven or polypropylene. Help me out, Robyn, if I'm wrong.
Non-woven.
Yeah, non-woven, and that also get. But I think that is almost unheard of. Most of that will go to landfill. I think Stuart may be able to reassure me that all the huge quantities of plastic used now to advance maize, certainly in our area in South Devon, I would say 50% of the maize crop is grown through clear plastic. Now, I would like to be reassured that that is 100% breaks down to carbon dioxide and water under the conditions that it finds in the soil. I'm not entirely sure that it does, and I know that a PhD student was doing some work on it locally to us, because that could be like another one of these huge ones that, like the fibres that someone mentioned in the sewage, because it is used in vast quantities. I would gather much larger, I would guess much larger than silage wrap. So, I mean, I think that's a big one. The oil-based, the question, and the clearly someone a little sceptical about the motivation of the oil industry there. But, I think we need to be a little bit careful about the starch-based ones, even if it is potatoes. Personally, I think that a big distinction should be drawn between starch-based plastics that are made from annual crops, which are generally a disaster for the environment because they involve cultivating the land every time. So, maize to produce starch to make plastics doesn't seem very sensible to me. I mean, the work that we're doing is to try and make the cellulose that we're going to use the plastics from perennial crops, largely from forestry byproducts, or is it not byproducts, Robyn?
It's not currently byproducts.
Okay, but at least they're perennial crops, so it's like many times less damaging than an annual crop. And I think that is an important distinction to draw. Personally, I'm not massively reassured when I hear cornstarch or potato starch. And from Phil about the lower down the food chain, does that make you a bottom feeder, Phil? I was thinking of fish there, but anyway, I completely agree. I mean, the plastic, the whole thing has supported what is a completely unsustainable system with very long... I was almost going to respond to Erica about the cucumbers. About a couple of weeks after Robyn did her work and we decided we didn't need to put plastic in cucumbers, I stood and watched 3 pallets of cucumbers being tipped into the skip that hadn't been wrapped in plastic. They'd come all the way from Spain. Now, many of you in the room might think that we shouldn't import cucumbers from Spain. Anyway, but that whole... It doesn't work without all this plastic, you know, the supply chains that we've developed. And one thing, you know, I'm not sure that saying that the waste justifies the use of the plastic, because, you know, as I think you're suggesting, Phil, the problem is, you know, the system that we've created, which could never have existed without the plastic in the first place. So it's a difficult one. You know, I wholeheartedly agree that it is. I would never describe my business as sustainable either. You know, it might be marginally less bad than others, but it's certainly not sustainable.
There is a system of food supply which isn't sustainable, and it has been created because plastic was so cheap that it's allowed you to import your cucumbers.
Yeah.
Whereas actually I know consumers expect to be able to buy cucumbers all year round, but it comes back to this strawberries at Christmas thing, doesn't it?
I think people are now starting to think, oh well, I can't get my meat not in plastic unless I buy it locally, because then I can take in my own container. Now, it's not ideal for a larger business that's sending out to customers, but for people who are perhaps, it's giving them an awakening and sort of feeding the opportunity. And that will lead change, because if people want change, then the market will provide.
I generate a 1 ton poly bag of orange string every year. It doesn't weigh a ton, but it fills a ton bag. Red Tractor can't tell me where to get rid of it. Bucks County Council can't tell me where to get rid of it. Here's a chance for a new NFU recruit. CLA can't tell me where to get rid of it. Natural England can't tell me where to get rid of it. There's a private company which says when I've accumulated 5 tons, they'll come and collect it. That'll be in 20 years' time. Do you want to recruit a new member?
We're
Stuart?
always keen to recruit new members. But I think for me it gets back to this issue that actually what we're seeing is, because, if you like, agricultural plastic waste is almost at the dirty far end of the spectrum, it's the one that people are not investing in the infrastructure in, and we end up paying the consequences of that. And I think it's a real problem. But certainly the very specific one I will take away.
Are there any ways, like as a buyer, to discern which are the truly home compostable plastics?
Sure. So there's actually a standard EU classification for compostable, and home compostable will also carries a mark, and it's actually done by a Swiss company, and it's called Vincoat, and it says home OK Vincoat on it. It's a mark. Or you can look for a seedling logo. The best thing to do when you're approaching suppliers or you're looking for new product is to ask them for a data sheet, because that will give you a breakdown of what's actually in your material. And then what you want to know is ask them how long it's going to break down in and what conditions, because everything will break down at some point.
Anyway, I'm just thinking that maybe does the future lie in just having far more street markets? I mean, my problem is I've had a guy, box for years, and they're absolutely fantastic, and I can't find veg that tastes as good as the Riverford veg in local farmers markets. But isn't there a way of creating food for markets, if you see what I mean? We could go along with our baskets and help ourselves to the green leaves from Riverford. Do they have to come in a box to your front door?
There's been talk about bagged salads, there's been talk about silage wraps, there's been talk about polytunnel plastics. None of these things existed 80 years ago. Would the panel agree that basically what we've done is we've created technologies that have packaging and plastic problems that come along with them, and basically the end game really should be to discontinue these technologies?
We've been working for the last 10 years on trying to farm beyond oil, all fossil fuels, including plastics, and we're getting a long way towards it. But our the most annoying bit is our end point when our produce goes to our customers. It's a question for Robyn really. Is when our meat goes to our customers, it goes in plastic.
So I'll start with the last one. The problem with compostable materials and materials that are made from renewable sources is that they allow, they're very permeable, so they allow the movement of oxygen and water through the material, which is quite the contrary to what you want to do when you're packaging meat. You can laminate different types of materials so they become less permeable, but at the moment there isn't a solution that is impermeable but still breaks down. The more layers you put, the more difficult it is for your detritivores and your bacteria to get through to the packaging itself. That's not to say that there won't be. Innovate UK have released another lot of funding, and there is definitely money out there for companies that specialise in this industry to upscale and to move into new areas. The thing with meat packaging is because it becomes contaminated, it's really difficult to then recycle it as well. So unless your customers are washing out their trays properly, drying them and then putting them in their recycling bins, they're probably going to be discarded. And because of that, there is a big focus on it in packaging development. So although there isn't anything, it may be something of the future.
And again, that goes back to Phil's point about our supply chains and how long they've become. I mean, meat will always taste better, just like strawberries and tomatoes will if they've never been anywhere near plastic and never been anywhere near a fridge. Actually, it would be, or a cold fridge anyway. So the 2 points on the technologies, kind of can we unthink them, and the street market. I kind of going to answer them in the same way as that. I mean, we're just trying to do the best that we can in the world as we find it, and you know, I could stand here talking about the world that I dream about living in, and then there's the world that I have to run a business and pay 630 people's wages. And I said it was my business just now. It's not my business anymore. It belongs to Robyn and Christian and everyone else who works there. But so, but anyway, it is. You know, with that, we are pragmatists at Riverford. You know, we're definitely not the epitome of sustainability. We're trying to do the best we can in the world as we find it, and quite apart from that, they wouldn't let us in the farmers' markets anyway because we're too far away, and my brother would kill me. Yeah, so that's my final point, is that we're pragmatists trying to make the best in the world as we find it.
Especially when you're talking about shopping at farmers' markets and things, I wonder, this isn't necessarily answering the question, but I'm thinking so many people have said, oh yes, we don't want to shop with plastic anymore. But all this is talking about making it more difficult for people to shop and people having to shop locally. And I wonder how many people would actually carry it through if they knew what the implications of not having plastic were. Does that make sense? What I'm trying, you know, that it meant shopping locally and more regularly and not having the shelf life, whether people would actually carry it through when it came to it.
Stuart.
It's really interesting actually hearing the word pragmatism, because I think that's absolutely right. I think, look, some of what is being asked here, you can be idealistic about where we might want to go with these things. The reality is we have to live in a real world, and I think therefore, you know, there are some big triggers that we need. And I think one of the things, you know, forgetting the point about David Attenborough, actually his program was a phenomenal trigger for just getting us to start talking about it. That's the first. We've then got to make it easier. But I think for me, one of the most interesting bits in this is actually where you have long, complex supply chains, they do not help farmers. You know, short, secure supply chains, wherever they are in the world, we have all seen the consequences of long, complex supply chains, and not just in relation to plastics. We've seen them in relation to safety, integrity, authenticity, and lots of other issues. So I think for me, if you address that issue about some of the structural supply chain issues, then actually you will deliver some of the plastics on the back of it.